everyone, welcome to another video. It's been a while, it's been a busy month or so, a number of reasons. The first very important thing before we talk about any books, the most important thing to tell you is that I got engaged. The wonderful, wonderful Amy asked me to marry her and of course I said yes, of course. So yes, that has been what is happening in my life in the last month or so. So yeah, all very, very exciting things. So that's the life update. There's not really much more to say on that at the moment, because, you know, nothing happens now for like 2 years. But that's the life update. Let's talk about some books. I didn't read that many books in September. I read 8, which is a good number, to be fair. It's a very solid number that a couple of years ago I would have been very happy with. 3 of them were audiobooks, so I didn't do as much like actual sit down and reading as I had hoped to in September, but you know what, I still read some great books. I also read some not so great books though. It was a very mixed month, and actually pretty evenly spread across like the 2 to 3 stars and the 4 to 5 stars, fairly evenly spread. So not the best in terms of like the average over the month, but some brilliant books that I read. So I'm filming this at the end of October because it took me a while to get to. So some of these books I read nearly 2 months ago. So I will do my best to remember the finer details of what I did and didn't like. And as always, I'm going to be ranking my September books, starting with my least favourite and going all the way up to my favourite. So without any further ado, let's get to the books. So my least favourite book that I read in September, and I was gutted that this was my least favourite because I had really high hopes going in, and that is, if I remember the full title correctly, I think it's The Scandalous Confessions of Lydia Bennet Witch by Melinda Taub. That's it, yeah, Scandalous Confessions, yeah. I don't think anyone's surprised that I was excited for this book. It's Pride and Prejudice, it's fantasy, it's historical, it's female driven, all things that I like, all things that I like. And I did like how the sort of fantasy element, the magical element was interwoven with the Pride and Prejudice story. I thought that was done really well. There were lots of things I didn't like. There was just too much of this book. It was very overcrowded with plot lines. I think almost, I mean, it's hard to say because I picked this book up because of the Pride and Prejudice link. But I think the Pride and Prejudice sort of squeeze in kind of felt almost unnecessary. The most interesting plot lines were nothing to do with that, but there were just too many plots going on all at once. I don't know, maybe if there's been a sort of assumption of knowledge of Pride and Prejudice, you know, the whole story was kind of rehashed for us. But yeah, there were a few too many plot lines. The writing style, especially at the start, was that kind of faux historical, kind of like a parody of Lady Whistledown kind of thing. Very florid, and there were a couple of sentences I highlighted because I was like, this sentence does not make any sense, nor does it serve any function. It would be like, but behold, you see, like that kind of thing. Yeah, so some really good things, but ultimately a letdown. Moving on though to the 3-star books, and we have our first audiobook of the wrap-up, and that was Islands of Mercy by Rose Tremaine. I've never read a Rose Tremaine book. I'd never heard of this book. I was looking to see if Katie McGrath had ever narrated any audiobooks, because I quite fancy Katie McGrath. So that's why I listened to it, is because of my crush on Katie McGrath. And to be fair, in that department, I had a great time. It's historical, it's again sort of Regency, early Victorian, and again too many plot lines. There were too many plot lines, there was too much going on. I think maybe this is not a book that works very well as an audiobook, because I did struggle to like link the different plot lines. Some in England and Bath, some in Borneo, that kind of peak of the British Empire sort of time period. Yeah, it just didn't really come together for me. And then moving up in the 3-star zone we have Mythology of the British Isles by Jeffrey Ashe. Now, I read this as my non-fiction read for September. Something about British mythology gives me very autumnal vibes. I don't know what it is, but it does. So, you know what it is? I reckon it's that Merlin would come around every, like, October, you know? Maybe it's that. We're just bringing it back to BBC Merlin for the second time in this wrap-up already. I didn't actually enjoy reading this book. It was really interesting. There was a lot of really interesting stuff. It was very dry. It went on for too long. And it had a sort of... I felt like Jeffrey Ashe was quite sceptical and kind of... Not just sceptical, kind of... he would almost make fun of people who believed in mythology, if that makes sense. It was very kind of like, oh, well, this was disproven in such and such, and this was disproven in such and such. And it's, on one level, I'm like, we know, like, it's mythology. So there was a little bit too much of that. I think there is a place for some of that, but it was a little bit too much. So yeah, lots of really interesting things, and I definitely learned a lot, especially about Arthurian legend and the sort of different roots of different legends. That was really interesting. But yes, it was a bit too long and a bit too dry. And then the top 3-star book, and I deliberated for ages as to whether this should be a 3 or 4 stars, but in the end it did fall on the side of the 3 stars, and that is The Royal Game by Anne O'Brien. Now, this was my buzzword reading challenge pick for this month because the prompt for September was game, so perfect pick. And it tells a story of, I'll get their name right, the Paston family in the 15th century in England. And again, I love historical fiction. I love female-driven historical fiction that centres women's stories, especially when it's real people. These are real people, and they were very prolific letter writers. The author had taken their real-life letters and turned them into a novel, which I think is a really interesting idea and a really interesting approach. Sometimes the letters kind of got in the way of the story almost. You sort of slow down to have a letter, but it did kind of root it in historical truth, you know, it gave it that grounding. So I did really like all of that. Again, it just got quite dry and slow towards the end. And I think this is another one of the things where when it's real people, sometimes it can be quite hard to get that pacing, and this is the first in a trilogy, I think. There was a third perspective, so it alternated perspectives, and then a third perspective was introduced very late on in the book, which was very jarring. We had a whole new person, and yeah, it's based on real people, so there's only so much you can do with the plot, but it just didn't quite work for me. I think there would be things that I might change maybe. So yeah, so there are things I did like and things I didn't like so much. I enjoyed the other Anne O'Brien book that I've read, which I think was The Shadow Queen. So I will be reading some more of her books. I'm not going to continue with this series, but I will read some more Anne O'Brien books. Now, I only read one 4-star book in all of September, and that was Chasing Harmony by Melanie Bell. And I saw the summary of this and I was like, yes, I have to read it. Because it's a coming-of-age story about a classical musician, a bisexual classical musician. I was like, yes, please and thank you, I will read this book. So I did, and I really enjoyed it. It was very weird. It was weird. It was weird. It was quite experimental, quite abstract in some places, but it somehow worked, and I don't know why. The timeline jumped around a lot, so it followed the one main character and different periods in her childhood and her youth. But it worked really well. Usually, I think jumping timelines is hard to do well, and this book did do it really well, of kind of keeping you in suspense as to, well, where did this person end up? What happened to this person? Where did this person come from? That you could sort of see the different narratives of her life. It kept you really engaged to see what would become of everyone. It was not what I expected at all. It had so many interesting approaches to storytelling that I've never really come across before, and I really enjoyed it. And next up we have an honourable mention, and this is a reread. It was hands down the best book I read this month, but because it's a reread, it gets an honourable mention, and that is The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. For months I've been wanting to do, maybe years, I've been wanting to do a full Narnia reread. And I say full Narnia reread, I never finished The Last Battle when I read them as a kid. So I wanted to read the first 6 and then finish The Last Battle. And I was like, I'll do it on audiobook because they're all on Libby, and then I can just do that alongside all the other books that I want to read that I haven't read yet. And then I thought I had the perfect time to do it in September, and I was going to do a reading vlog of it, and I did the first entry, and then I got loads of audiobook arcs, so I haven't returned to the project. I read The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. I loved it. I have not yet got around to Prince Caspian, but it was so good. Of course it was. Of course it was brilliant. I loved it so much. It was such a nice nostalgic visit to a childhood favourite. I can't wait to eventually, at some point, listen to the rest in the series. And we are into the 5-star zone. Now, there are only 2 more 5-star books. Like I said, it was a very spread out, in terms of ratings, reading month. So, of my 2-star books, the first one I'm going to talk about is 50 Feet Down by Sophie Taynon. This is like the ultimate September, October read. It's a little bit spooky, not in a kind of horror way, there's nothing supernatural, but it's just got those spooky vibes. It's a mystery. It's set in Vermont, so of course it's perfect autumn reading. There's a sapphic romance. There's like family secrets being uncovered. It's a proper sit in front of the fire with your flannel and your blanket and your fluffy socks and your pumpkin spice latte and get stuck into this book. And this is one of those books that you pick up and you just can't put it down. Like every chance I got, I was getting my Kindle out, I was reading as much as I could, finding just like even just 2 minutes here and there to read some more. And once I started reading, I did not want to stop. I would, I'd stay up late to finish it. It was so good. I really, really enjoyed the reading experience, and it's told through the perspective of a journalist who goes to this town in Vermont where various people have gone missing / been murdered. And it was really nice to have that kind of new in town sort of atmosphere. It was just great. It was such a great read. All the vibes. I'm just going to sell it on vibes. You should read it because vibes. And so the best book that I read in all of September, it was another audiobook, and it was The Kamigawa Food Detectives by Hisashi Kashiwai. I've heard so much about this book. It keeps getting recommended, and then the audiobook cropped up on NetGalley, and I was like, yes, please and thank you. And it was so lovely. It was so lovely. This is a format that works really well for an audiobook. Not all books lend themselves to audiobook, and this one worked so well, and it was just such a lovely read. It was like being wrapped up in a hug. I loved it. This has been translated from Japanese, and the Kamigawa Food Detectives are a father and daughter duo who help people recreate a dish from their past. So it might be something that their mother or grandmother used to cook for them, and they'll find the exact ingredients, they'll cook it the exact same way, including maybe using water from the area which has a different hardness to the water of that area they live in, or meat from a particular meat market. Whatever it is, they will find every aspect of that dish and recreate it for you. So you have these 6 little mini stories, which again, perfect for audiobook because each one is like half an hour, 40 minutes, of following these 6 different people who want to have these meals recreated. And through it all, you have the relationship of the father and the daughter, and it was such a really sweet relationship, and to find out more about their family throughout the story. It was lovely. It was like a mini-series, a TV mini-series. It would make a really great TV miniseries. I loved it. It was glorious. So that is it, my very late September wrap up. Let me know what you read in September, if you can remember that far back. And if you've read any of the books that I read, let me know what you thought of them. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and click subscribe if you would like some more videos from me, and I will see you next time. Ta-ra for now.